Welcome to Structo's Meet the Writer. This is a short form video series where we talk to some of the poets and writers behind the pieces that are in Structo 20. Today, very lucky to be talking to Michael Bazzett. Hi, Michael.
Hello.
And you're very kindly offered to read one of the pieces. You have two poems in the new issue. Please go ahead.
This is called Once They Discovered They Were No Longer Needed. Once they discovered they were no longer needed, facts began sifting out to the hinterlands, settling in hollows and lost corners where they slipped into old sweaters, chopped wood, and dusted off the occasional linen hardcover. Perhaps the meditations of Marcus Aurelius, or To the Lighthouse, which invariably fell open in their laps like a single broken wing as their tea cooled and they drowsed by the fire. A lot of folks these days think birds evolved from dinosaurs, yet in actuality they arose from the interbreeding of wind-blown leaves with stray thoughts and half-remembered songs. A close examination of the common house sparrow, for instance, really reveals a 99.6% genomic overlap with the storm-flurried leaves of early November. Just yesterday, I witnessed a bald eagle turning slow circles in a winter sky, and the light that shone through the white fan of his tail was more gold than white, and that is how the lampshade was born.
Great, thank you for reading that. It's really nice to hear. You've clearly done plenty of readings before, or actually, perhaps it's your teaching sneaking through there because you have an incredibly controlled way of reading that. It works really well.
I've spent, this will be my 30th year in a classroom. So, and I do love to read aloud with my students. I think, poetry in particular, but all literature is meant to live inside the body as well as just the brain. So.
What, do you teach a specific subject, or are you teaching broadly?
I teach, here in the States, it's called 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. There's 16 through 18-year-olds. The 10th grade course is an American literature seminar. So Walt Whitman, Emily Dickinson, Toni Morrison, Zora Neale Hurston, F. Scott Fitzgerald, it's a lot of heavy hitters.
Yeah.
And then I teach my senior seminar. I have one in myth, which is really lovely. It's actually how I got into the Popol Vuh, which I translated and was published a few years back. But I have a deep love of mythology, all different traditions, and it's really a pleasure to get to see students reading the Popol Vuh or Gilgamesh or the Odyssey for the very first time. It keeps it fresh.
Do you find this, it sounds like the teaching and the poetry and the writing is very much interwoven. They're not kept separate like some people's day jobs and their creative work.
Oh, very much so. Yeah. In fact, I'd never got an MFA, and I think it was the deep reading that you have to do as a teacher, and also a number of those books that I listed off. I think I read, until Emily Wilson's new translation came out, I think I'd read the Fagles translation 18 years in a row,
Wow.
and you get to know a poem or a novel or just any work so deeply, inhabiting it that way. And I think that really informed my writing practice a lot and taught me a lot, in ways that I probably wasn't even fully aware of at the time.
Do you remember how you came to poetry?
I'd always written it, but it was kind of like, I grew up in a relatively, it's a poetically famous town, Rochester, Minnesota, because of the James Wright poem, A Blessing. Lying in a hammock at William Duffy's farm at Pine Island, Minnesota, which was also very close. I used to ride my bike from Rochester out to Pine Island. But I was not aware of either poem until I arrived at college and read them in the Norton Anthology of American Literature. And it was a very strange, kind of dislocating, yet harmonious occurrence, you know, to suddenly see these places that to me were very mundane and the opposite of poetry being name checked. And it wasn't like on a list of possible occupations for me, you know. So I did start writing poetry very early, but I don't think I started taking myself seriously as a poet for probably another 10 years after that. And Saul Bellow has a line that I really like. It said, "The writer is merely the reader moved to emulation." And I love that idea. It's like a tidal river that just twice a day starts to flow the other direction. You know, it's this current, we think of writing as this output, but, you know, or reading as this input, but, you know, that current can start to flow outward. And it's just, so for me, writing is almost universally an extension of the reading process. The other poem, the Umberto Acabal, after I've just been reading a ton of him, I'm very often my poems a conversation with other poets.
So would you say your education in the act of writing poetry came from the act of reading poetry?
Yes, yeah, very much so. I mean, I did seek out instruction and I did some summer workshops and whatnot, but for the vast part of it, I was reading alone on my couch. My wife writes fiction, so we kind of had our own little, they'd call it a bubble today. We had a little pod. Yeah, it's also, my first book didn't come out till I was 48. It definitely makes things slower, but hopefully deeper.
Yeah, if you can live with the words and let them build up. I think it was in the acceptance letter to you that I mentioned the line breaks. I think I don't think I'm misremembering that. We have one of our readers on the team she's very critical, to put it mildly, and she described your line breaks as lovely, which basically caught everyone's attention immediately. And I went on after that to look at some of your other writing, and it's true. You have a very good sense of when to break a line, and often poets who, I know, perhaps younger poets or poets who maybe haven't been writing for as long, seem to put them a little bit arbitrarily, or, you know, they may be following a certain form, and that's one thing. But in all the pieces I've seen of yours, there is a huge amount of deliberate placement, and it adds an enormous amount. It's not just a blank line. And to understand that comes out of reading widely, I suppose, is interesting.
Well, thank you for saying that. That's very kind. It is, for me, that's obviously the volta, the turn, the verse. You know, that's what makes a poem a poem.
Yeah.
But I really think there's three things to listen to. There's the breath. You know, we're very visual. The eye definitely has a place there. But for me, the tension between the line and the sentence. You know, because sometimes I love Robert Hossa's long, elegant syntax, you know, and yet his lines are always perfect as well. You know, I think he's a real master in terms of sort of maintaining that balance between having poetic lines each where the first and the last word land, you know.
Yeah, right.
You're inside this sinuous architecture that's much bigger than that.
Yeah, land is exactly the right word. It's like, and yes, that's exactly as we. So you mentioned your first book came out when you were in your 40s. You have a few in your backlist now, and you have another one coming relatively soon, I think.
Yes, well, I have a book coming out. I have a full-length collection coming out with Milkweed editions in the fall of 2021. So in just a little more than a year. And it's called The Echo Chamber. It has a retelling of the myth of Echo and Narcissus, right in the center of it. But, you know, there are selfies. It's, you know, it's really the perfect story for a time between the, you know, kind of the erasure of Echo's voice and the echo chamber we all live in, and just the narcissism particularly that's so come to the fore of American culture, where everyone's just looking in their own individual mirror and really think the smallest viable unit of humanity is a single person, as opposed to this relational tribe or family or pack. So I've been really fascinated with that story for a long time. One of the things I teach in the myth class is Ovid's Metamorphoses.
Yeah.
We read about 300 pages of it. I don't read the entire thing with my high school.
That's still a lot of Ovid.
Plenty. Yeah. And, it's very timely stuff given how completely he sort of nails, I think, how much Olympus and everything that was happening there, and Zeus in particular, overlaps with predatory masculinity and victim culture and so many other things. So it's really interesting to see high school students engaging with that. But the myth of Echo and Narcissus in particular has really stuck with me, because I think almost everyone knows the Narcissus story. But the fact that Echo, she should have been the perfect woman for him, right? All she could do was repeat back his own words. And the fact that it didn't work has always been, it's resonant with me, I guess. So I retold that story at the center, went back to Ovid. It's not really a translation as much as a version,
Yeah.
And then all the other poems on either side of it are kind of using that as a lens, maybe kind of a cracked lens or a refracted lens, looking at, late stage capitalism and where we're at in American culture right now. Yeah.
So that's going to be interesting. That 2021, you said?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And I had a book come out this week as well.
Oh, you did?
Officially.
Oh, is that the Temple?
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Great. So this is also a collection?
It is. It's actually, I've got one here. This wasn't planned,
It had a beautiful cover. Yeah.
And they I think we call them chapbooks, but are they called pamphlets primarily?
Chapbooks is, I call them chapbooks, but I think pamphlets are also fine.
Yeah, because it's it's like 33 pages. And It was a very coherent but small collection. I didn't think it was going to grow into a full-sized collection, and it felt complete as it was.
So completely sidetracking for one moment, my day job is book design. The cover of that what is it made of?
It's actually paper. It's matte.
It's beautifully done.
But it has a projection. It's funny that there's a linen cover in the poem that I read, because the whole idea is I wanted almost the cover of the book to serve as a head fake, as many of the poems do.
Nice.
Where you see it as a hymnal, where it's got the blue linen cover, it has the gilt lettering. We wanted the foil stamp to actually be impressed into it. And on the paper cover, it was very, I don't know, it's quite flat, it's not glossy, so the letters would really pop. I've got my mirroring on, so it's going to be reversed there.
Yeah,
and then to highlight the fact that there was kind of that linen cover quality printed onto the book, we had a silhouetted image coming through, so that there's a contrast. Yeah, it was really fun. I was much more involved than I usually am, because Bull City Press, who published it, is very small and really engaged me in the design process. So, and Ross White is the guy's name who designed it. He's also the editor there, and just did a fabulous job, I think.
Oh, that's great. But it's interesting that you took it almost as an opportunity to not trip up, but perhaps make people question what they were getting from the offset.
I kept thinking of it as a stealth hymnal. I wanted to drop it in the back of a pew and no one would even notice. It was an interloper.
So is there anything that you're working on now, or are you in the taking a breath, as many of us are?
I actually, most of my new work, the poem that I read is very much in this vein. I'm writing a lot of poems exploring the extent to which memory simply is imagination, in fact, is imagination. And all of these things that we tend to look to for a certainty or documentation or form of measurement are simply functions of the imagination. And the fact that there's, of course, something intrinsically beautiful about that in art making, but there's also something incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm just thinking about a lot now. But yeah, with this new book out, I'm probably going to do some Zoom readings around it, and then the manuscript is finished for the echo chamber, but I'm dragging a comb through it, and of course the school year is going to start in a few weeks, and that'll keep me very occupied. Yeah. So.